The notification on my phone was innocent enough at first glance. A motion alert from the small camera I'd installed in my home office 3 weeks earlier, tucked behind a bookend on the shelf above my desk. I was sitting in my car in the GO station parking lot in Oakville, supposedly on my way to visit my sister Joan in Hamilton. I wasn't going to Hamilton. I opened the live feed with steady hands. Melissa was at my desk. Her back was to the camera, but I recognized the burgundy cardigan she'd worn at breakfast that morning. She had my filing cabinet open, the locked one, except it wasn't locked anymore, and she was holding documents up to the window light, photographing them one by one with her phone. Even from the grainy feed, I could make out the blue TD Bank letterhead. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. After everything I'd learned about this woman over the past 2 months, I suppose there was nothing left in me to shake. I put the car in drive and called David Grantham. "She's in my office," I said the moment he answered. "Right now. Liv." A short pause. "I'm 2 minutes from your street. Don't go in alone, Dorothy." I drove home the long way, giving David time to get there. I'd already called Constable Renee Fortin at Halton Regional Police the day before. She'd been fully briefed. She was parked 1 block west on my street, waiting for my text. "My name is Dorothy MacPherson. People have called me Dot for most of my life. I'm 64 years old, and I spent 35 years in the Halton District School Board, the last 12 as vice principal of a high school in Burlington. I retired 2 years ago, 8 months before my husband Gordon died of a stroke at his desk on a Tuesday morning in February. He was 67. The paramedics said he likely hadn't felt a thing. Gordon and I had been careful people our whole lives. We'd bought our house in Oakville in 1994 for $285,000, a 3-bedroom semi on a quiet crescent not far from the lake. That same house was worth just under $900,000 now, fully paid off. We had our RRSPs, maxed TFSAs, and I had my Ontario teacher's pension, which gave me a steady, reliable monthly income without needing to touch our savings. We weren't wealthy by Bay Street standards, but for 2 educators who packed lunches and drove used Hondas, we'd built something real and solid together. Gordon used to say we were rich in the only way that actually counted, which was that we owed no one anything. I had 1 child, Andrew. He was 37, worked in IT, and had spent most of his adult life being charming and mildly irresponsible in roughly equal measure. I loved him the way you love someone who can frustrate and delight you within the same hour. He had Gordon's laugh and my stubbornness, and absolutely neither of our instinct for saving money. Melissa came into his life 14 months before all of this. Andrew brought her home for Thanksgiving dinner, and she was lovely, warm, attentive, full of compliments about my cooking and my house. She worked in property management, she said, which she explained was why she asked such specific questions about the square footage and when the roof had last been done. I thought she was simply professionally curious. I told myself that later, when I was reviewing all the small moments I'd misread. They'd been together 4 months when Andrew called me in a panic. He'd been let go from his IT firm. "Downsizing," he said. Could they stay with me for a while, just temporarily? Melissa's lease was ending, and they'd planned to find their own place. But with Andrew between positions, could they use the spare rooms to save money while he got back on his feet? I said yes. He was my son. The first month was fine. Andrew seemed genuinely motivated. He updated his resume, took LinkedIn certifications, went on calls. Melissa cooked twice a week and always offered to clean up. She called me Dot, which felt friendly. She brought home a poinsettia in December and left it on my kitchen windowsill without making a thing of it. Andrew seemed happy in a way he hadn't been in years. Around week 6, things began to shift in ways I couldn't name precisely at first. Melissa started asking questions. Not aggressive ones, careful, warm, persistent little inquiries wrapped in apparent concern. Had I thought about downsizing, now that it was just me? So much house for one person. Had Gordon and I done much estate planning? Her aunt had died without a will, and the whole family had been left in such a mess. Did I have a financial advisor managing my RRSP because her colleague at RBC could get me a much better rate on a GIC? Each question on its own seemed reasonable. Together, over weeks, they formed a shape I didn't want to recognize. Andrew stopped seriously looking for work around month 2. He had reasons that made just enough sense to resist. The tech sector was contracting. Remote work had changed everything. He was thinking of pivoting to project management and wanted to take a course first. I paid for the course. It sat unopened on his laptop. Melissa worked from home, she said, managing rental properties. I never once heard her on a work call. What I did see was her on her phone constantly, in corners, with her back to the room. And once, when she left her phone face up on the counter and a notification came through, I caught a fragment of a message from someone listed as Sandra Mom's house update. I didn't know who Sandra was. I filed it away without knowing why. The moment that changed everything happened on a Wednesday in October. I'd driven to the Oakville library to return some books and realized halfway there I'd left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter. I turned back. I came in through the side door quietly, the way you do when you've forgotten something and don't want to make a production of it. Melissa was in the dining room on her phone. Her voice was low and quick, the voice of someone certain the house was empty. The pension alone is close to $4,000 a month, she was saying, and that's before whatever she draws from the RRSPs. Gordon left her in genuinely good shape, a pause. The house is the real piece. Nearly $900,000, no mortgage. Andrew's an only child, and she's not close with any extended family. Another pause, and then a quiet, satisfied sound. He doesn't need to know the full picture. He just needs to trust me, which he does. I stood in the hallway and did not breathe. A continuing power of attorney for property is the cleanest route. If we can get her to sign even a limited one, we have access to what we need while she's still alive and everything looks completely above board. Sandra says it's not complicated if the person signs willingly. A pause. She's not going to sign willingly, so we need her to believe she needs to. You plant enough doubt about her memory, get Andrew worried enough that he brings it up himself, and she'll sign just to make him feel better. People do it all the time, especially women who've just lost a husband. They want someone to lean on. I backed down the hallway the way I'd come and out through the side door. I sat in my car in my own driveway for 35 minutes, staring at the garage door. Then I drove to the Tim Hortons on Dundas, ordered a medium coffee I never touched, and called David Grantham. David had drawn up our wills and handled Gordon's estate. He was methodical, quiet, and not given to alarm. When I repeated the conversation precisely, he was silent long enough that I thought the call had dropped. She used the phrase continuing power of attorney for property specifically, word for word. What she's describing is a textbook approach to elder financial exploitation. It's documented, it's common, and it's very difficult to prosecute without evidence. A pause. Has there been anything so far? Any talk about your memory? My stomach turned. Yes. 1 week earlier, Melissa had mentioned at dinner gently, with apparent care, that she'd noticed I'd left a stove burner on that morning. I had done no such thing. Andrew had glanced at me with a brief, worried look that she had clearly cultivated. She'd reached across and touched my hand. It happens to my Nan, too. There's nothing embarrassing about it. I'd told myself I was being oversensitive. Now I understood precisely what she had been doing. She's building a narrative, David said when I told him, creating a witness to your confusion before she presents the document. Dorothy, I need you to go home, act entirely as you normally would, and come see me tomorrow morning. Don't confront anyone, don't change anything, don't let them see that you know. I went home. I made dinner. I watched Melissa pour wine for Andrew and laugh at a story he was telling, easy and warm, and I felt something shift permanently inside me, not into anger, not yet, but into a cold, clear certainty. Over the next 3 weeks, I became someone I would not have recognized a year before. I ordered a small recording device online and placed it in the dining room disguised behind a potted plant. I had the office camera installed by a security company during an afternoon when both Andrew and Melissa were out. I changed every banking password, enabled two-factor authentication on every account, and called my advisor at TD to ask quietly whether any unusual inquiries had been made about my accounts or assets. None had. Not yet. I also found the paper. It was in the blue bin, under a flyer for a Mississauga furniture sale, crumpled but legible, a practice form. A continuing power of attorney for property, partially filled out in Melissa's handwriting, my name as grantor, Andrew's name as attorney, crossed out lines, where she'd rewritten the wording to try different phrasing. She was rehearsing the presentation. working out the language that would seem most natural when she finally showed it to Andrew to show to me. I smoothed it flat, photographed it on my phone, and put the original in a sealed envelope, which I gave to David the next morning. He held the envelope for a long moment. This establishes premeditation. She isn't improvising, she's executing a plan she's had for some time. He set it down carefully. I want you to see your GP this week and ask her for a brief note confirming your full cognitive capacity as of today's date. It goes on file. If Melissa later tries to claim that any document you signed was signed under impaired judgment, we have a dated professional counter to that. I made the appointment that afternoon. My doctor, a woman I'd trusted for 16 years, listened to my summary of the situation and then sat back in her chair and was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to write you that letter," she said, "and I'm going to add one of my own to your file." She shook her head slowly. "I see this more than people realize." The recordings I collected over the following 2 weeks were more than I'd anticipated. Melissa in the dining room, on the phone with Sandra, asking specific questions about how a CPOA could be used to authorize a property refinancing without the grantor's ongoing involvement. Melissa telling Sandra that she needed everything to look entirely voluntary and routine. And twice, I recorded Melissa speaking to Andrew in the kitchen, her voice gentle and concerned, suggesting that perhaps it might be kind to bring up organized financial planning with his mother, just to take the pressure off her. At her age, alone, she'd probably welcome the support. And Andrew saying, both times, that she was probably right, that he'd bring it up soon. I listened to those recordings alone in my kitchen late at night, and I cried in a way I hadn't since Gordon's funeral, not for myself, but for my son, who was being carefully turned into a tool without ever knowing it. He was not a bad person, he was a trusting one. And Melissa had found that trust and was using it the way you use a key. I went back to David. We moved faster. He reviewed my will and suggested the addition of a spousal exclusion clause, meaning any future spouse of Andrew's would have no automatic claim to the estate. It was a precaution. It felt like a grief in itself, to protect my son's inheritance against the possibility of someone exactly like the person currently sleeping in my guest room. I signed it anyway. And then I laid the trap. I mentioned at dinner one evening, in passing, that I was heading to Hamilton to visit Joan for the weekend. Just an overnight. I mentioned, with deliberate casualness, that I'd left some insurance documents on my office desk that I needed to get to when I was back. I watched Melissa's eyes move to Andrew's, just a fraction of a second, but I saw it. I drove to the GO station. I did not get on the train. I sat in the parking lot and watched my phone and waited. For 1 hour and 23 minutes, nothing. Then the motion alert came through and I opened the live feed and there she was. I texted Constable Fortin 2 words, "She's inside." The response came in under 30 seconds. On my way. We met at my front door. David, Constable Fortin, and me. David knocked and identified himself. Nothing from inside. A drawer slid shut somewhere. Constable Fortin knocked and identified herself. I used my key. The hallway was quiet. They entered first. My office door was half open, and through it I could see Melissa standing at my desk, her phone face down on the surface, my RRSP statement, and a photocopy of my house deed spread in front of her. She looked up. Her expression moved quickly through surprise, then calculation, then a practiced version of innocence. "Dot, I thought you were in Hamilton. Andrew asked me to find some insurance papers you'd mentioned," he was worried. "Andrew is in Waterloo," I said, "at his cousin's birthday dinner, which you'd know if you'd spoken with him today." Constable Fortin stepped forward. "Miss Holloway, I'm Constable Renee Fortin, Halton Regional Police. Please step away from the desk. I'm not doing anything wrong. I live here." "You have permission to occupy one of the bedrooms," David said evenly. "You do not have permission to access Mrs. MacPherson's private financial documents." He glanced at the desk and at the phone lying face down on top of her photographed findings. Or to photograph them. "You set me up." She wasn't speaking to either of them. She was looking only at me, and the warmth she'd maintained so carefully for months was entirely gone. "You pretended to leave." "I protected myself," I said, "from someone who was recorded in this house discussing how to get me to sign a power of attorney under manufactured circumstances." From someone who practiced filling out that form with my name on it. From someone who told her colleague my son didn't need to know the details, he just needed to trust her. I held her gaze. I have all of it, every call. The color left her face completely. In Canada, under federal law, one party to a private communication may legally record it, David said, in exactly the tone a person uses when they have been waiting some time to say a thing. Mrs. MacPherson was always a party to conversations that took place in her own home. Constable Fortin asked Melissa to come to the station to give a statement. The phone went into evidence. Melissa left without looking back at me. David handed me an envelope once the door had closed. Formal eviction notice, properly served. He would file for emergency removal first thing in the morning given the circumstances. 10 days, he estimated. Andrew arrived at 9:30 that night. He'd been at his cousin's in Waterloo when I called him easy and relaxed, hockey game noise in the background. He drove 2 hours to Oakville without asking many questions because my voice had told him enough. He sat at the kitchen table, and David played him 3 recordings. Andrew listened to all of them without speaking, without moving. When David closed the laptop, Andrew put both elbows on the table and pressed his hands over his face and stayed like that for a long moment. "She kept telling me you'd left the stove on," he said finally, "that you'd been forgetting things, that it might be kind to look into a power of attorney just organized, responsible planning," she said. "She said you'd probably be relieved to have the support." He looked at me. "I was going to bring it up with you. I had it all planned out in my head." "I know." "Mom." His voice broke on the word. "I'm so sorry." I came around the table and held him. He was 40 years younger than me and considerably larger, and he shook the way children shake when something fundamental has broken without warning. I held on and didn't let go until the shaking stopped. We talked until past midnight. Andrew told me things he hadn't known he'd been participating in, how Melissa had discouraged him from discussing finances with me directly, saying it would stress me out. How she'd suggested he check my RRSP statements online just to keep an eye on things, implying I'd agreed to this. How she'd started referencing the house as something that would come to Andrew eventually, in a tone that made it sound like a shared future rather than my home and my life. She had never asked for money directly. She'd been far too careful for that. What she'd been building, slowly and quietly, was her own essential role in managing an inheritance that hadn't happened yet, positioning herself before anyone noticed she was being positioned. Andrew was at the police station by 8 the next morning, giving a full statement. He came home looking depleted, in the way people look after they've held themselves together somewhere they couldn't afford not to. Melissa's phone confirmed what I already knew, and more. Photographs of my financial statements, dating back 5 weeks she'd been in my filing cabinet before, during small windows when I'd been out for groceries or appointments. And the text thread with Sandra gave David what he needed to pursue fraud charges. The investigation took 4 months. Melissa was charged with 1 count of attempted fraud under the Criminal Code of Canada and 1 count related to the unauthorized access of private financial records. Sandra faced a regulatory proceeding through her professional body. Andrew's civil case, Melissa had used his credit card without his knowledge, disguising just under $3,000 in transactions as shared household expenses, was resolved through a collection order. Melissa pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and received a conditional discharge with 2 years of probation, no jail time. Andrew's lawyer was honest with us. The system rarely imprisoned people for first convictions of this kind, particularly without a completed theft. I was angry about that for a long time. Then I made a decision to be angry about the things that could change, and let the rest go. Andrew found a 1-bedroom apartment 10 minutes from me and came for Sunday dinner without fail. He was in therapy, working through what he described as the particular humiliation of having been deceived and used simultaneously against someone he loved. He called me before and after first dates as a habit that had started as caution and became something warmer than that. He texted me names and locations. He asked questions I hadn't expected a son to ask. "Pay attention to consistency," I told him once, after coffee with a woman who sounded genuinely promising. "Anyone can show up well once. Watch whether they show up the same way every time, not just when they're trying to impress you." Is that where Melissa went wrong? Or went right, I suppose, until she didn't have to anymore. "Yes," I said, "that's exactly what she did." It has been 6 months since the afternoon I drove home from the GO station with steady hands and a cold, clear head. My house is mine again. In every sense, not the tense, watchful silence of those 2 months, but the real quiet of a place where I belong to myself. The dining room table has dahlias on it. The mornings are uninterrupted. I drink my coffee and read and do not feel like a tenant. I kept the recording device. It's in a drawer in my office. I don't expect to need it again, but I'm not ready to let it go. Some lessons stay with you in the shape of small, practical objects. Andrew came for dinner last Sunday and brought wine and a little Norfolk pine he'd found at a garden center. He said it reminded him of the one we'd had when he was small. We ate and talked and found an old hockey game online, the '87 Canada Cup, something Gordon had watched on tape when Andrew was barely old enough to sit still. Andrew didn't remember it but laughed at the right moments anyway. After dinner he came and stood in the kitchen doorway while I rinsed plates. "She used to call you Lucky," he said. "Melissa. Early on, she used to say you'd had such a comfortable life, that things had just worked out for you and Dad." I turned off the tap. "And? It wasn't luck, was it? You taught for 35 years. Dad marked papers on weekends for decades. You were careful for a very long time." He was quiet for a moment. "She made it sound like your life was just sitting there, like you hadn't earned it." "She needed to think that," I said. "If she'd admitted it was earned, she'd have had to admit what she was taking." He picked up a tea towel without being asked and dried the plates beside me, the way he had as a teenager before he decided it was beneath him, and eventually came back to when he grew up. We stood there in the quiet kitchen, with the Norfolk pine on the counter and the dahlia in the next room, and it was enough. It was more than enough. I think often about other women like me. Retired. Widowed. Houses paid off, pensions steady, savings intact from decades of discipline. Women who say yes when their children need help, because of course they do. That is not a weakness, that is love. But love needs to keep its eyes open. I talk now in ways I didn't before. I told my book club 6 women between 58 and 72 who meet in rotating living rooms on the second Thursday of every month. I expected sympathy and received it, but what I didn't expect was how quickly the silence in the room gave way to stories. A sister whose son-in-law had quietly assumed control of her grocery budget. A friend whose nephew had been nudging her toward a power of attorney for 18 months. A woman whose daughter had stopped visiting after the daughter's partner made it clear the visits were too stressful. We talked for nearly 4 hours. It was the most useful evening I'd spent in a long time. I also changed my will. Everything to Andrew, as it has always been, but structured carefully now with David's guidance. A spousal exclusion clause, a trusted executor outside the immediate family. Documents that say clearly, in legal language, that I was of sound mind and full capacity when I signed them, and that I understood exactly what I was signing. I am not leaving anything to chance. Gordon didn't, and neither will I. His reading glasses are still on the bedroom windowsill. I've meant to put them away for months and keep finding reasons not to. Some mornings the light catches them, and for just a second, the geometry of the room is wrong without him in it. I talk to him, the way you do. "She's all right," I tell him. "Andrew's all right. The house is ours." If you are reading this somewhere, wondering whether you are being too suspicious or too difficult or too protective of what you've spent your whole life building, you're not. Trust the feeling that arrives before you have language for it. Find a lawyer you trust. Document what you see and hear. Get help from professionals who know what this looks like, because it has a shape and they will recognize it. Protecting yourself is not a betrayal of the people you love. Sometimes it is the most direct path back to them. My name is Dorothy MacPherson. I am 64 years old. My house is mine. My son is healing. My savings are intact. And my future is exactly as bright as I choose to make it.